Hello, my name is Braque and today I will be talking about George Braque and his art style Cubism. Cubism is an art movement that is created between 1907 and 1909 by George Braque and Pablo Picasso. The actual term, Cubism, describes a revolutionary style of painting. Cubism is marked the end of the era that is dominated by the Renaissance and the beginning of modern art. Cubism consists geometric figures such as triangles, squares, rectangles, and cubes. So when you look at any artwork that is designed by cubists, you can see all kinds of shapes. All the cubists were influenced by other cultures, particularly like African masks. The color management on these artworks are based on gray, green, brown colors and with a little bit of light. We also have two branches in Cubism. We have analytical Cubism and synthetic Cubism. Analytical Cubism started in 1910 and it was done in 1912. And this one is called like the early phase, and it's based on decomposition of geometric shapes and figures. And here, the artists, they try to analyze the subject from many different viewpoints, and they try to reconstruct within the geometric framework. The second one we have is synthetic Cubism, and it started in 1912 and it was done in 1914. And it was the continuation of the analytical Cubism, and its basis were the recomposition of an object. So now we'll be talking about the history of Cubism, how did it started and how it was done. So it all started in 1907 when Pablo Picasso and George Braque met, because Pablo Picasso was one of his biggest influences of George Braque. And they started working together, they started to develop a new modern movement, and they called it Cubism. And the whole transition from the tradition to modern art, it started with Pablo Picasso's masterpiece called The Ladies of Avignon. You can see the picture right here. And also, Picasso, he was always considered the creator of Cubism. But after he painted his painting, they started working together, and the Cubism started weakening by the First Civil War, and it actually completely died in 1919 when the post-war started. Biography of George Braque. Here we can see three pictures there on the right side of the screen. And I will talk about his biography, his early life, and how he met Pablo Picasso. So he was born on May 13th in 1882 in a small village called Saint-Cyr that was near Paris. And he died August 31st in 1963 in Paris. So George Braque, even when he was younger, he always had that tendency toward paintings, towards art. And it all started when his father actually owned a painting business. So he started developing interest in texture and many kinds of art. And in 1889, he went to École des Beaux-Arts, but he failed all of his exams. So after that, he finished a craftsman diploma in Paris. Braque's earliest paintings, they were all made in the Fauvist style. And also, Braque, he contributed his colorful Fauvist paintings to the exhibition that was called Salon des Indépendants in 1906. But after that, he was extremely affected by the visit of Pablo Picasso. Like I mentioned earlier, they met in 1907. And he was not immediately impressed with the painting and Pablo Picasso, but he started experimenting with his style and trying to have like a new movement of art. And that's when he started his one of his first works that was called Nude. After that, he tried to return to Mediterranean and to painting landscapes, and he was rapidly developing his own work, his own vision, rather than just taking and replicating exactly what he saw. Also, Braque, also with Picasso, started to make large contributions to modern art, particularly through the exploration of Cubism. Like I said, they both developed the two phases of Cubism, analytical and synthetic. Braque is celebrated colorist, and he can be traced through contemporary art to those painters who work with color in similar ways. And Braque is most remembered for his use of collage. In 1914, he was enlisted to start in the army, and he was fighting in the Second World War. In the next couple slides, I will be explaining George Braque's artworks. And we have the first one is called Houses at Lestock. And that's actually in France, we say Maisons et de Lestock. I hope that was the right pronunciation. Anyway, this is one of the first Cubist paintings, and it was painted in 1908 in France. Also, this is an oil on canvas, and he actually painted this in Lestock. That was a small village in France. So that's why the name is Houses at Lestock. Here, he used all the earthy color palette, and actually we can notice that after in his other works, Braque used that earthy color palette. So they all have a similar tones and shades of colors. And here we can see that it contains all the simple geometric forms of cubes. He uses a shading method here, so he can emphasize the parts that are like really, really important. And the parts, actually the tree that was like towards us, that's in the beginning of the picture, we can see how they are like bigger, and he tried to emphasize those pictures. Here we have a woman with a mandolin. This artwork is painted in spring of 1910, and this was one of the first Cubist works that was created in the oval shape. And here we can see a woman that's actually holding a musical instrument. And this artwork was a product of Braque's first Cubist phase, so it's referred as analytical cubism. Here we can also see all kind of horizontal and vertical lines. And he used all the earthy color palettes. Like I mentioned earlier, in all of his works, he tried to use the same tones and shades of colors. So he uses gray, light brown, green, and all other kind of earthy colors. And here, this simple shadow creates a feeling of the actual movement. So when you look at the picture, you can actually have a feeling that it is moving. And because of all these shadows and colors, it can give you that feeling. Violin and Candlestick. That is an oil canvas that was painted in 1910 in France. It contains all kinds of three-dimensional objects on this flat canvas. In my opinion, this was my favorite picture, his favorite artwork, because it has those similar objects, but on the other side, they're like really, really different. And when you actually look at the picture, it can give you some feeling of confusion because you can't recognize what is the object, which is really interesting to me. Also, he uses all the objects are actually black outlined, so he uses the earth tone colors to like shade inside the objects. And the important parts have those darker colors than others, so you can actually recognize the objects. Since Cubism is a transition from a traditional to modern art, it has a big influence, and futurists, they found the inspiration in the Cubism's energetic compositions, and they tried to adapt the collage art. And that whole idea of deconstructing subjects into fragments influenced all kinds of artists so they can actually put some kind of Cubism in their own art style. And Cubism's influences is also evident in contemporary art. So from Cubist tattoos to graffitis, they all are inspired by Picasso's portraits and Braque's artwork. Here we have Marsden Hartley, and he was one of the first artists that was influenced by George Braque. He was an American artist that was born on January 4th in 1887. He was the youngest sibling. He had 9 siblings. So his parents were Eliza Jane Hartley and Thomas Hartley, and they were English immigrants. Unfortunately, his mother died when he was 8 years old. And he had to leave school when he was 15, and he started working at the shoe manufacturing factory. And then he started his art education in 1893 when he moved to Ohio to live with the rest of his siblings. When he moved to Ohio, he started to taking local lessons with the local artists. And in 1898, he finally got into school that's called the Cleveland School of Art. The thing that was like really, really important to him, even when he was younger in the beginning of his career, he always liked to travel. And in 1910s, he spent some time in Paris and Berlin. Here we have his famous painting that's called Portrait of a German Officer. And here we can see that the elements of Braque's Cubism. That's when he started using the elements, and he actually realized how much George Braque influenced him. And here we can see the image of the von Freiberg, and he died in 1914 in the World War I. Here's my works cited page, and I hope that you enjoy my presentation, and I hope that you learn something new. Thank you so much for listening.